at an area of world archaeology, an area of archaeology within the world that people don't really care to think about, don't really care to visit. And I've got to start off by saying that today we're doing the archaeology of Southeast Asia. And with the archaeology of Southeast Asia, we're going to be visiting the countries of Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, Indonesia, and Burma, otherwise known as Mayanmar, but they're going to change their name again soon as well. Yeah, I can remember back in the early 1990s, I was sent a book from the South Asian Research Institute or something, and I just put it on a shelf and didn't even look at it because I just thought, well, why am I even bothering, even going to waste my time looking at this book? And so much I was wrong about that idea that it's lived with me for many years, that I've really not explored the landscapes of the archaeology of Vietnam or Cambodia and the like. But this lecture that I've delivered last week and this week has really opened up my eyes on another part of the world in archaeology that is absolutely, above all, fascinating. And there's so much about it. There's so many enigmas. There's so much we can learn. Now, the monument you can actually see in the background now is one of the famous sites within Southeast Asia. This is Angkor Wat. This is in Cambodia. So within our beginnings of the lecture this evening, one thing that we do say is that the archaeology of Southeast Asia goes back 1.5 million years. So that says a lot for the cradle of civilization being in Africa, when in fact you've got evolutionary straits going on throughout Southeast Asia at exactly the time that evolution is moving on in Africa as well. Amazing areas of archaeology. What we do see with the likes of Southeast Asia, they're really starting to go out there now and say, look what we've got. We've got this wonderful landscape. We've got this wonderful gem of information to show the West. We as Western archaeologists have so much ignored Southeast Asia that we should be shamed into not allowing it much in the way of time given in schools, university and colleges. There's lots of archaeological work going on there now today, and it really helps us understand what's going on within the sense of world archaeology. One thing that we're seeing in Southeast Asia is that they're actually using advanced modern techniques. This is the LiDAR surveying at Angkor Wat. I'm probably mentioning Angkor Wat a bit too much, but what we do have with the LiDAR here is that that there is the wall that we've just seen on the earlier image. The temple complex behind is what you'd also see going along this plaza, across this bridge, into this complex. But this is only a small part of an absolutely massive archaeological landscape. Angkor Wat is set within the field of an archaeological landscape that goes over 200 square kilometers. It's said that what you can find at Angkor Wat and the immediate area today is far bigger than the capital city of Cambodia, Phnom Penh. And if we cut through the tree line and we do LiDAR, and look what we've got. We've got not only the buildings that we're seeing arrangements of buildings, commercial areas, processing areas, ornamental ponds, canalization, roads, banks, and look at that, ornate gardens. And when you think about the likes of Angkor Wat, and you think about Cambodia, and you think about all the other countries within that landscape, their medieval is far more advanced than our medieval. And many people ask, many people have asked when I've done this lecture, if these are such amazing people, if they're so advanced hundreds of years before us, why didn't they keep those advances going? It's quite tender, the answer to that. And the answer is that when you look at the landscape of Southeast Asia, They're Eastern people. They're not Western people. In the West, we conquer, we take, we destroy, and we make what somebody else has got ours, and we put our religion first and all these things. Across Asia, their mindset is trade. As long as you're able to trade with another city of another civilization over there, everything's fine. What happened when the Dutch East India Company got there, and the English East India Company actually got to the likes of Thailand, Cambodia, what they did, they took away the trade. And when you start to take away trade, you take away commerce. And when you take away commerce, you take away money. And you got to take away money, you take away people's ability. And what we did, we cut all those trade links. We made the people suffer. And then we conquered these lands. These people were the better ones because they saw the world in a different way than we do. Our way of Western living, even today, if not back in the day totally, is very greedy. We are so greedy and full of ourselves in the West that we destroyed these civilizations that were far superior in many, many ways than even we are in some areas of the planet today. And I could justify that. I've really gone into this. So what we're seeing is the sense of carving. The sense in their medieval is much more advanced than our medieval. They even in their art, they're carving people that actually look like people. In our medieval, we're carving people that simply didn't seem to relate to anything. And the wonderful sense of the buildings, the wonderful sense of how they're putting everything together, their buildings as part of religion, their buildings as part of civilization, and so on and so on. As we're looking at the other plan now, we can see where Angkor Wat is, and obviously Vietnam on this side. We troll all the way over to Burma, and then Indonesia and Thailand. I know some of you are going to ask if Southeast Asia should include Malaysia, should include Laos, and so on and so on. But for some strange reason, from the archaeological spec that I've been reading up, Southeast Asia doesn't include those countries, and I have no idea why. So what we can see here, we can see a nice little plan. Here we go. It's not coming up. Well, you can see a nice little plan. Angkor Wat is down here, and that's Angkor Wat we've seen. Over here is a complex of temples that is 5 times bigger than Angkor Wat. And the entire landscape, there's a small area, is full of these wonderful woodlands and forests today. And it would have been full of civilization back in the day. They were able to harness water. They were able to use water for their own proper purposes. They didn't have cities like we do in the West today that flood. They had cities that were able to control their own environs. So we got this plan here where the cursor is. And we move that over. So we've got Burma. We've got Thailand, Cambodia. We've got the likes of Indonesia and Vietnam. So those are the countries where we're going, and those are the countries where we're visiting. And thinking about this landscape and why it's so important, when in this country we're still living in caves. We're talking about 100,000 years ago. We've got people moving across the land bridges all the way down to about here where Timor is, and then using boats to go over to Australia. Now this is 100,000 years ago. In Western archaeology we've got no concept of boats until about 10,000, 15,000 years ago. But back then we're talking about being able to go over to Australia using this land bridge, and then using this sort of lesser strait of water all the way over to Australia using boats, and then colonising the likes of Australia. And when we think about civilization pushing all the way from Africa through to the Arabian Peninsula, all the way through into this wonderful landscape that we're looking at, great achievements of our human ancestors. So this is what we're doing. Presents an overview of the archaeological research in Southeast Asia, and it goes back 1.5 million years ago. It's one thing that can be said is that the landscape that you see today in the upland areas is very similar to the landscape that you would have seen tens of thousands of years ago. What has changed across that entire archipelago is that the landscape, i.e. known as the Sunderland Shelf, has been inundated with water. And being inundated with water, what next happens is that all those low-lying agricultural lands have been lost. But we've still got a great deal of archaeological evidence in those upper land areas of Indonesia. We're still talking about Indonesia, but looking at this map itself, giving you a sort of bit of an idea, an overview of how things have changed over, different countries come and go. This is Cambodia today is much smaller than the red blotch on the map, but again, borders continually changing across that landscape. Where are we next? The archaeology of Indonesia. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to get into flow. You don't need to see any more images, and we're going to try and get on here and go. Have we lost somebody?
No, I think so.
Oh, we got a red dragon in the corner, which represents Martin. Well, Martin's a bit of an egotist, really. He takes people out to places and says, "Look at how amazing I am! I have found this, and I've written a book." I'm not that type of person. I don't go out and say, "Look at the book I've written." Anyway, we're proud of you, Martin. Good bit of research. Right, the archaeology of Indonesia now. Again, the reason why I wanted to do this, the reason why I want to encapsulate you all, is that there's this huge bias with the East. We've got, I know John loves his Romans and so on. But when you think about it, Indonesia, Vietnam and these countries are built on trade. And there's no reason why they couldn't have looked towards the West many years before. But they kept themselves to themselves until we got over there in the 1600s. And it's all linked with the Chinese. It's all linked with that trade with the Philippines and Japan as well. And one thing that has to be said about Indonesia, it's a walk in understanding and a respect for their archaeology that today we can actually learn from. In fact, in the 1750s, they're even setting up their own museums. I did actually say that right. In the 1750s, Indonesia is setting up its own museums, where in this country we haven't even set up the British Museum yet. In the late 1700s, listen for this, they're setting up an archaeological study institute to look at the wonderful landscape of Indonesia. 250 years ago, we're still going on about Druids, Martin, and we're still going on about Celts. And strange little stories like that, mythical people, the Celts, that wonderful Pete keeps going on about. And in 1913, we've got government institutions that are really putting their history and archaeology at their heart. But I've actually got to correct myself. And this is in no way an apology to Martin and Peter. I think this great squabble to say that I'm right and you're wrong with Druids and Celts and all the rest of it is probably the wrong approach. If quoting a historian that once said to me, he said, "Karl, why is it you archaeologists try to destroy the myths and legends of our lands like King Arthur? Why didn't you let people believe it?" And sometimes I lose that. And that really much brings us to Indonesia. The people of Indonesia love their history, and they've loved it for hundreds and hundreds of years. During the early period of archaeological discovery in Indonesia, from the 1500s, amazingly enough, They're starting to look at their history and archaeology in the 1500s. They're looking at their ancient statues, temples, ruins, archaeological sites, artifacts. And strangely enough, some historians argue that the Indonesians are leaving their history and archaeology undisturbed back in the 15 or 1600s because they're scared of it, okay? I tell you what, we're scared of hill forts and we're scared of burial mounds in the 1600s, but we're looting them. Back in Indonesia, they're not looting their archaeology and history. They're leaving it there. Whether it's about taboos and superstition or misfortune, if you go in amongst the ruins, they cherish them and they see them very, very important. This is that fascinate that me and Martin were looking at up in Wales a couple of days ago. It's like today you've got this mound that people are still going to, and they're burying their cremated remains of cats and dogs and human beings, and they're putting plaques up there and crosses. And this was supposedly a mound dismissed by archaeologists as being a natural geological outcrop, when in fact the people in that local area knew and had been connected to that landscape for a very, very long time because it's been special to them. Listen to local knowledge and people's connectedness with the landscape, and let it speak, I say. And this is what they've done in Indonesia. They've seen it in their hearts and soul throughout the years. Wondrous folklores and legends of multitudes of demons. It's said that at a huge temple complex on the Javanese island at Suai, there was talk about multitudes of demons building thousands of temples, and those who should interfere with those temples shall be forever cursed and damned. And in fact, those temples are still with us today. Whereas in this country, most of our history and archaeology is sadly now gone. And they seem to keep the sense of there's an era. There's an era not in Indonesian archaeology but Burmese archaeology. It's known as the pagan period, right? And the pagan period in Burmese archaeology is a period before the Buddhists. It is a period before the Hindus. And the point is that in Burmese, not Indonesian archaeology, but there's similarities, that you've got a religious site, and it's always remained a religious site. The Buddhists move in, then the Hindus move in, and it's a tourist attraction today. Does that sound familiar with our own churches? But we won't admit it. That lots of churches you have old trees like yew trees. It's a pagan site, and then it becomes a Christian site, and so on and so on. But back there, it's just a flowing archaeology, a subtle sense of connectedness with the landscape. This next point is that is fascinating. I've already intimated with this with Indonesia, and again, a lot to learn from. On the 24th of April, 1778, when the Americans are making a bid for independence, in Indonesia, a group of Dutch intellectuals with the help of local Indonesians set up what's known as the Royal Batavian Society for Arts and Sciences, with its aim to study archaeology, history, art, science, ethnographical studies and physics. And the point is, the aim was to publish their findings, to make public their findings, to make people interested in what they've got around them. And this is involving the local people, because if it wasn't for the local people given access to these sites, then we wouldn't have this wonderful Batavian Institute. With lots of these landscapes running between different Western powers, in about 1811, there was a certain governor, a governor of British Java. And this governor himself actually saw that the landscape of Indonesia, particularly Java, is rich in heritage. It's very rich in heritage. And this is something that Napoleon saw in Egypt. He set up his study for Egyptian studies in the late 1700s. So by 1801, they're really starting to study and record the archaeology of Egypt. But we've got exactly the same thing in Java. The difference is with Java in Indonesia is that instead of taking and looting the archaeology and shipping it all over to the West, what the British government is doing is actually saying, look, we'll keep it here. And if people want to see what we've got, I've written a history of Java, which he published in 1817. So instead of looting the archaeology, you can send these publications home to Britain. You can do a translated version and send it to the people of Amsterdam, for example, the Dutch. And you can actually keep the monuments in the country and tell them about it through an illustrated history of Java. It was a really, really important work because it's one of the first works that look at an archaeological history of a country on the planet. And this happens to be in Indonesia. It's not in Britain, because we really didn't get to this type of stuff for a while. Okay? It's not in Thomas Jefferson's newly founded America, although he'd like to think so in the late 1700s. This writing about a country is Indonesia. This sparked a wider interest in Javanese archaeology. A number of temple ruins were surveyed, recorded and catalogued systematically for the first time. So here's the parallel. At the same time where we're looting sites in Italy, Naples, in Britain, we're still opening several burial chambers every single Sunday to sort of for a load of gentlemanly interested people to see what they can find. We're not really recording anything out there. They're better than us. Yes, I'm going to say that Eastern people are better than us in the way they've seen their past and the way they see their past today. Unfortunately, where there are gods, there are devils and there are demons. And when they started sending these books over to Europe, people started to think, actually, I want one of those statues that's in the book. Sending somebody over to Indonesia to actually loot one of the statues. And unfortunately, the governor had brought in the devils because the devils wished to have one of the statues in their museum. At this stage, the British Museum in London had been around for a few years. The Tropen Museum in Amsterdam had been open, and they decided to nick some of these statues. That the governors of Java and the governors of Indonesia throughout the archipelago were trying desperately to stop. Okay, they were nicking and looting things in Egypt for another 100 years. But they didn't allow this to happen in Java. They didn't allow this to happen in Indonesia. They didn't want it to happen. That's the thing, because they cherished their history and archaeology. 1901 is one of those moments that should be recognised in the annals of archaeology, where the Dutch East India Company, working alongside the British government, and so on and so on, by the 14th of June 1913, a formal archaeological service of the Dutch East Indies is established. Even though we're studying archaeology for all these years, they've got an archaeological body as such, overlooking everything within Indonesia. And this is this seems to be one of the first institutes of its kind in that part of the East. Remember, as I said, Rahman in the late 1800s, the Iraqi archaeologist was desperately frustrated with the fact that all of his archaeology has been nicked from the country, from Iraq, We don't have a national museum in Iraq. It's all being nicked. In Indonesia, they're trying to save it. 1913 is the moment the object of the Archaeological Service, the object of this was to attempt to ensure that every archaeological find, discovery, exploration, a study was conducted and recorded correctly and in accord with the scientific approach of modern archaeology. And all this was to be published with the administration through countless journals, countless books, countless catalogues composed and published, which recorded everything within the colony. And obviously all these books were being sent around the world, and people would be marveling at the wonderful archaeology of this very remote landscape, Indonesia. Indonesia itself could be said to have been affected by the wars. It was naturally overtaken by the Japanese because the British army ran away and surrendered. So it was taken over by the Japanese. However, what we do see is that the Indonesians managed to keep hold of their archaeological sites. They managed to keep some integrity, and they managed to keep their museums with their finds in them still. The Japanese are wandering around Indonesia, but they're keeping their archaeology there, which is great. And interestingly enough, the backdrop of Indonesia and the backdrop of the whole of Southeast Asia is very interesting to how archaeology is treated when warfare is being undertaken. And what I mean by that is quite simple. In the West, for example, in the Second World War, we're blowing at the likes of Pompeii. We're carpet bombing Dresden. We're blowing up museums in Berlin, and the Luftwaffe is destroying the museum in Hull. The heritage of the West is a target in Western theatres of war, and you could also say in recent history with ISIS and the First and Second Gulf War, archaeology is to be destroyed and is to be seen as the enemy in some way, shape or form. ISIS saw it that way. However, across Southeast Asia, there's been a different mentality, and it was even seen by the Americans as well. And it's no silly epitaph on what was happening in the Vietnam War. But when we look at all those wonderful films and footage about the Vietnam War, we see these wonderful monuments in the background. Most of them ain't being blown up. Most are being ignored by the Americans and the Viet Cong. And they're just being left there and just being part of the backdrop of the war. They're not targets. And even then, there's a difference between how warfare is undertaken within Southeast Asia compared with how warfare is undertaken in the West in regards to the archaeology. Archaeology being at the heart of Indonesia for 250 years or more, going back to the 1600s, and we've got the sense of these museums in Burma, for example, and we've got these early museums in Indonesia in the throughout the 1800s and so on and so on. It's strange that we don't see Indonesian archaeologists graduating from Indonesian universities in archaeology until 1953, because they didn't feel they needed to. Indonesians saw their history and archaeology different than we do. In the West, you've got to have a degree to be recognized as an archaeologist. In Indonesia, up until the 50s and probably even today, you can be connected with your past and you can study it and you can broadcast it, and you don't need to be a university qualified archaeologists, which is also another interesting way of looking at all this. So what we're going to do, we're going to do a few images. Because I know Peter's sick of looking at my face. You know, because Pete on that trip on the weekend, he was constantly by my side, holding my hand. This is one of those wonderful sites in Indonesia. This is from the 1300s in the jungles. It's a wonderful monument, but a site so wonderful as this wasn't found until 1914. The jungles in Indonesia hold secrets like this from the 1300s and 1000s and earlier. And lots of it is still to be discovered. And it hasn't been destroyed by roads and various other activities. It's still there. This is known as there's the bathing pool. The green water says it all. Sandra's been swimming there recently. The Indonesians not only excavate their archaeology and display it, they restore it. They keep on top of it. They keep bringing tourists there and just sort of displaying it. And there you go. That's one example of the scaffolding around it. And we cannot ignore this. At San Negran, Indonesia, not so many years ago, they found the skull of a Homo erectus. A skull of Homo erectus was found at the site, dating beyond 750,000 years ago. So people are in Indonesia and not so much in Europe very early on. We've got more evidence of our human ancestors throughout Indonesia, all the way over to Vietnam. We've got more evidence from those neck of the woods than we do from the whole of Europe and most of the rest of Asia. It's teeming with archaeology. And that tells us something else. But I don't know what that something else tells us. Does it mean to say that people left Africa a lot earlier than we think? Yes. Did they evolve and leave from another locality and go to Southeast Asia? I don't know. But what's happening is Homo erectus is telling us maybe 1 million years ago, maybe 1.5 million years ago, that people are in that area, hominids, people on two legs, are exploring the wonderful landscape of Indonesia and so on. And look at this wonderful image. This image itself is a collection of Hindu and Buddhist sculptures in the Museum of the Royal Batavian Society of Arts and Sciences. And this was up and running in 1896. And look at that there. We've got Hindu and Buddhist sculptures alongside each other. We got two religions alongside each other. We got people making an effort to collect these statues and put them in a museum. How fantastic and how amazing is that? Now this is one of the symbols of Java. Has become perhaps the best known icon of ancient Indonesian art as one of the rare images that successfully combines aesthetic perfection with the spiritual. And when you look at a statue like this, it just shows the skill of the carver 500, 600, 700 years ago. And we are, other than Michelangelo and a few other advanced artists, everyone else is drawing quite crude and carving in a very crude way. These people knew how to carve. Oh, and we can't have any lecture without this. This comes from the 800s. This is known as the Central Javanese Wanabayo hoard, discovered in 1990. And again, finding something like this in the West would be absolutely wow. Finding it in Indonesia has got the bigger wow factor. Solid gold, absolutely amazing. So what we're going to do now, we're going to actually go on to something that's really unusual. We've done the Indonesians now, as much as we're going to do tonight. So we've got to move on to another country. Now, I can remember, can I not, that a few years ago I said that they were looking for buried Spitfires at the end of an old RAF runway in Burma, mainland Burma, and we've actually got an update on it. And because it's about Burma, let's do a bit of Second World War archaeology of Burma. And I know you've got the image in the background. And basically they did a full investigation, looking into the enduring mystery. And actually what I'm going to do, I can actually tell you the end, because the end isn't... they didn't find any Spitfires in boxes. They didn't find them. But the scientific way that they undertook the archaeology, i.e. geophys, aerial photography, was so advanced that they were able to find the locality of where some things were buried, and they turned out to be boxes with old plane parts in, not whole planes that had been thought to have been buried by the British forces as they moved out of Burma about 1946. It said that there were rumours from lots of the airmen in the bars around the land in 1946 about these wonderful Spitfires being buried at the end of the runway in Burma as the troops were actually coming back, and they really wanted to see if it was true or not. So the research was so comprehensive. They surveyed an area of 52,000 square meters at the Yangon International Airport in Myanmar, Burma, and it said that they did geophys. They did lots of research stuff in various record offices and so on, but they didn't actually find these planes in boxes. But having a negative result is sometimes as good as having a positive result. The myths and legends have actually remained a myth and a legend. So what we mean by that, they found that they weren't planes in the boxes, but they actually found that there were other things in the boxes. So that goes into the myths and legends things. It was like a crime scene, the work that they actually did there. None of the original people who actually said that they saw some Germans burying boxes in a field are actually around today. But this is beautiful and iconic that they've actually done the work there. And it's sort of saying about the Myanmar government and the team working there. And it says here, the actual story of the Burma Spitfires is better than any legend, because it is by turns bizarre, fascinating, above all, it is true. So it is true, because the airmen coming back from Burma did actually see boxes. They presumed they were Spitfires. They turned out to be other things. So in other words, there were boxes, but they didn't actually contain these aircraft. But can I give you my own little story similar to this? My granddad was working at RAF St. Athan. It was sort of the mid stages of the war, and one day a driver turned up, and he said, I got 10 planes on the back of the truck, because what they would do, they would flat pack them like IKEA and put them into boxes. He said, I got 10 planes on top of the back in the truck there. I think I said bus in the truck there. Can you help me get them off? So my granddad was there, helping him get them off. And the delivery driver said, right, count them. And my granddad said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And the guy with the chitty sheet, he said 10. And my granddad said, no, there's 11. 1, 2, blah blah blah, 11. And he said, no, there are 10 here. The guy with the form said, with his clipboard. He said, there's 10. My granddad said, look, I can clearly count there's 11. And the guy said, no, there's not, there's 10. So the guy said, look, Noah, why don't you go off and get yourself a cup of tea? And my granddad was a bit angry at this stage. He said, yeah, I need to cool down. So he went off. And after half an hour, he came back. And the guy said to my granddad, he said, count them now. My granddad said, there's 10. And he said, yeah, I told you all along there was only 10. And my granddad said, I swear there was 11 there. He said, no, there was 10. Right. Anyway, years later, he was telling this story to somebody, and another guy said, oh, I was the guy who had to dig a hole to put the plane in at the end of the runway. And my granddad said, why did you do that? And he said, well, the delivery guy couldn't take a plane back. Because if he took a plane back, he could lose his job. Because somebody would lose their job in the factory because they couldn't. If you had 10 planes going out, you had to have 10 planes going out. And there's lots of legends and rumours on airfields of packaged boxes with Spitfires and Hurricanes in them. And archaeologists are going out there trying to find them. But as far as I know to this date, none have been found in these boxes. But the legends and myths still persist. So what we're going to do now, we're going to take a break. Are there any questions? No?
Yes. Yes. Just a bit bigger when you get the picture.
What's that?
You were saying, can you make the pictures a bit bigger when they get the pictures up? Some of them are a bit small to see still.
I thought I was.
Oh, it's a long way up here.
I thought I was. All right then. Are there any? Pete, you were going to ask something, weren't you?
No.
What about you, John?
Yes, having been to Borneo in my misspent naval youth, I went to Kota Kinabalu and that sort of area in Borneo, and I can't say as I ever saw any temples or anything archaeological other than a few tin huts. I mean, what is there anything in Borneo? I mean, I can appreciate there is in Cambodia, Laos, and that sort of area, but not in Borneo, I would have thought. Would you agree with that statement, Carl?
I would say they'd be colonial structures. Not that I know anything about Borneo at all, except we've got wonderful people still wandering around the forests of Borneo who haven't been seen by Westerners. But I would say that if we've got all these buildings and temples on all these other islands in Indonesia, and why not in Java? Why not in Borneo itself? So that's another neck of the woods. But I would say
It's not reported on much in archaeologically, other than people with things through the noses and feathers, is it really?
well, those are the types of people that they employ in Arriva Trains Wales today, John.
Steady now. Yeah, we got a few of them. Yeah.
Yeah, I know you got a few of them. Have you ever seen that trolley dolly, that transvestite, that dresses up in women's clothing, right? Looks really pretty, but the giveaway is the hands. Have you?
No, I think that's a bit of an imagination there. No.
Actually, no. It was somebody who worked for First Great Western, but I thought you may have met them.
Yeah, man. First Late Western, what do you expect?
That's true. And if a First Great Western train is late, you've always got to give it priority, haven't you, Martin? Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, I can have a break now, so we'll come back after the break.
Excuse me if the kids come rushing in. Yeah, they've had a rough old time this last week.
Right, back to my next bit.
That's stones, is it? Or is Marcus lichens?
They're lichens, yeah, they're lichens.
Not carvings.
No, they're not. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to say any more about that, because when Martin's here next,
You can tell us.
he can tell us.
So what is Mark? That's his hobby, is it? That he finds these things.
Yeah, he finds these things, yeah.
Yeah.
And he's been doing this for the past 2 years. He's written a book on it. It's brilliant. The stuff in there in this book he's done is unbelievable. So he said he's going to get me a copy. And anyway, the next country we're going to do, I don't think we're going to get through all this today, is Burma. And when we look at Burma, what we do see is that you've got this wonderful archaeology in Burma going beyond 250,000 years ago, before Homo sapiens got there, before anybody else get there. We've got Homo erectus, we've got the remains of that. And the wonderful thing about Burma, because I said there was a few parallels, when we look at the historical periods in Burma, their Mesolithic is the same time as ours. Their Neolithic is the same time as ours. Their Bronze Age is the same time as ours. Even their Iron Age is the same time as ours, right, more or less. So if you want to do any parallels of what's going on in Britain and somewhere else in the world, you can compare it with Burma. And strangely enough, they're using bronze at the same time as us. They're farming their landscape at the same time as us. Go.
Program that girly, I don't know where she's from, she does this LiDAR stuff from the sky.
Yeah.
She's done Myanmar, Burma.
And it's full of history and archaeology. It's full of landscapes. For example, their Bronze Age is arriving, the middle of their Bronze Age is around 1,500 years BCE. And when's that middle of our Bronze Age? Exactly the same time. So when they're coming across bronze and copper and all the rest of it, it's the same time. There's no links between any of these people. And then what we see is their Iron Age. They're starting to hit their Iron Age about the same time as us in Wales, around 750, 500 years BC. So they're hitting their Iron Age. You've got small villages and all the rest of it. The only big difference is that in Burma, they've got written records around 200 years BC. We don't until the Romans. But interestingly enough, their Iron Age continues to about 200 years AD. Bits of Wales are still sort of in its Iron Age there, living alongside the Romans until about that stage anyway. So, and the big thing that it's saying about this is that the key links between Burma and China, and that's really important. Even the way they're burying their people in the Iron Age in Burma is the same as us. They're thousands of miles apart, but there's no links, but they're doing the same things as us. So there's an interesting parallel. This is in Burma now, and you know they're burying their loved ones with earthenware goblets and sort of, and it's showing a very affluent society in Burma, and some of our fairly okay people in the Iron Age in Britain are sort of in that sort of affluent bent as well. So showing this chart as well. Oh God. I think I should forget that. Oh, look at that. We're getting there. Do you know, my little stepdaughter doing this last week, didn't I? Yeah. She was quite useful. We were gonna We were gonna hire a slave to do the images. So there you go. We've got 750 to about 275,000 years ago, and we've got the Paleolithic. But this bit about when you've got evidence in caves in the Paleolithic about 13,000 years ago, 11,000 years BCE, is the same time that we're starting to see really good evidence in caves on the Gower, for example, in Wales. And then you've got the Neolithic period. You've got Neolithic. You've got the Neolithic period there, ending around 2,000 years BCE, which is the same as when our Neolithic ends in this country. And you've got the Bronze Age there. You've got the copper and bronze. Obviously, the difference between what we're eating and what the people are eating in Burma is we're not eating rice. They're eating rice. And you've got the domestication of chickens, pigs. And it can be said about the whole of, Southeast Asia. Burma, Indonesia, and Vietnam and Thailand and so on, is that their economies are based upon trade, the water, rice, chickens, and pigs. If you've got all that, you can build cities. We're just too interested in killing each other, which we are today. We'll move away from that there. But I just wanted to. We've done a bit of Burma. We've done much more about Indonesia. Groundbreaking archaeological discoveries in Cambodia. So around Angkor Wat, through the aerial photography, through the LiDAR, through all the various survey techniques, with all the forest and woodlands around Angkor Wat and Angkor Thom and all the other cities around there, it's a huge landscape, absolutely huge. And they're talking about all the sophisticated surveying that they're doing now, and that's what their articles are talking about, because it's been so densely packed full of trees. You know, the archaeologists haven't been able to get in there. But with this new technology, they're able to fly above, or without being on the ground, they're able to serve the entire landscape. Not just a couple of square miles, but hundreds of square kilometers of landscape. They're finding everything. It's massive. In fact, they say that the landscape around Angkor Wat, with the houses and the industrial areas and temples, was much bigger than the modern-day Cambodian city of Phnom Penh. Bigger than that, and that's a modern city. And they come across like carvings of not just the temples, of stone carvings of elephants and various different things that they find them from above, and they send the team of archaeologists in to record them. And look at that there, an area of 320 square kilometers of ruins, structures. They're penetrating the dense vegetation using this LiDAR, and it's that type of area. 320 square kilometers of landscape is huge.
Over in China somewhere, the government covered all these pyramids in trees because they didn't want people looking at them or digging them or going there even.
That's probably to protect them. But anyway, that's China. That's something else. Another issue that we're not going to go to. But so here we go. For archaeologists, these lumps and bumps that we see in the forest, thanks to LiDAR, each has a meaning. These are all the traces of the civilization, the city associated with Angkor Wat, made of wood and thatch, that have disappeared. It's these contours that remain inscribed in the forest landscape we study today. However, this residual pattern we're really starting to learn a lot from. But when you think about it, there are whole buildings like this still being found. Because what's happening is the roots of the trees are intertwining into the temples, right? And the trees, you can see some of the trees above them even now, and this is a cleared area. You just got a canopy of trees above them, and they're all hidden completely.
Yeah, they've got big roots this size.
Yes, mango type roots. Yeah, exactly. Just sort of, just going in there and just taking over all the cavities and all the rest of it, and these huge buildings. And all this is being discovered today in modern day Cambodia. You know, these types of carvings all over the place. And what you could do with LiDAR, as I've already said, you can work out where the big buildings are, and you can just helicopter a team of archaeologists and then make sure that what they've got on the cameras, whatever, a couple of hours later go back into the helicopter and fly somewhere else. That before would have taken weeks to have just done that couple of hours work.
So there's no plan to sort of expose it, it's just to establish that it's there.
Yes, and to protect it. See, the thing is, lots of visitors go to Angkor Wat anyway, and they can obviously use the money to do all this work.
There was one big settlement. It was in the shape of a key in a big lake with a wall right around it. I can't remember where it was.
Were you sure that was in this area, Cambodia?
I think so.
It may have been. And before, instead of digging little holes everywhere to try and work out if there is anything, you can do the LiDAR. You can work out there's a monument there. Again, send the team of archaeologists in, excavate just that one area, record everything, backfill, and just go somewhere else. Again, that one activity before, as we've already said, would have taken weeks. Just a quick thing about Thailand now. We haven't really done much about with Thailand itself. In Thailand, there's an interesting piece. We're not going to do this for long, but a place known as Ban Non Wat, which is in Thailand. They've got archaeologists excavating the graves of various people from the Bronze and the Iron Age. And it basically says that they're coaxing the information out using dental picks, sketching, taking the artifacts away. They're going through all the soil to make sure they got all the artifacts. They're looking at all the pottery and so on. And all that work is being done now, not just at this site, but a number of other sites. But the important point of this article is what's said here. The archaeologist Hingham, who's been working there since 1969, says as follows. He says, until 30 years ago, our knowledge of this area was very sparse indeed. Nobody knew there was anything in Thailand. But now he says, Southeast Asia has become a major place in the world for understanding human history. Not just prehistory, but the history of our species. If anyone is remotely interested, you should go to Southeast Asia. And that's quite a statement to make. They're working on burial sites, villages, all this archaeology to give a wonderful perspective of the landscape in Thailand. Again, 30 years ago isn't far off that day that I was handed that book. And no wonder I had that attitude. And they're really starting to understand what they've got. Here we go. Vietnam, finally. Traces of ancient humans found in Vietnam. Biggest archaeological discovery. And what they're finding on Vietnam. So Vietnam's on that side. China's there, that side. So not this side facing India. On that side, facing over towards the Philippines and Australia. What they're finding in Vietnam is they're finding evidence of our early human origins. So you've got these pounding rocks, worked materials, and it's saying here that the breakthrough is that within the Central Highlands area of Vietnam, at 12 locations, they're finding evidence dating back 800,000 years ago of Homo erectus, upright man. Indications of very early crude settlements from, let's say, nearly 1 million years ago, all the way in Vietnam. So when we claim to be the origins of civilization, we really can't be.
It must have evolved everywhere.
Exactly. And why not? We are so up ourselves being superior to everybody else. And again, this final point that I said at the beginning, Vietnam, the network of trade. This network of trade is so early in Vietnam. You can see some post holes there with the layers that are going down, and it's well marked and so on. And what we've got there is that saying, even though they're coming across this trading site about 4,500 years ago in Vietnam, it's saying, we've got trading sites, 4,500 years ago, and they're saying we knew some artifacts were being moved around, but this shows evidence for a major trade network that also included specialist tool makers and technological knowledge. And when you're looking at something like that, if you want to do a comparison with Britain, this is 4,500 years ago. In Britain, we got places like Penman Axe Factory in North Wales, and we got the likes of Llandudno, Great Orme, and other places. But what's happening is that stuff is just being moved locally and just around Britain, nowhere really else. Yeah, but this stuff in Vietnam is being moved all the way over to China all the way over to the Philippines, all the way all over the place. So it's a massive trade. And this link, final point, this link to the past today that we no longer have in Indonesia, Burma, Vietnam, and all the rest of it goes back, that we can see in the archaeology 5,000 years, thousands of years well before us, and they've kept their links and their understanding of the past, and they've really got a wealth of information to tell us, and we've got a lot to learn from.
We're still living in mud huts, aren't we?
We were still living in mud huts, and I tell you what, right, it's that bias that we've got towards the people, and we've been so wrong. Are there any questions, folks? And you can put on the lights now, Brian. If you may, please.
I got about it all is
Go on.
you're saying about parallel
Yes,
developments in the world.
yes.
I know it's nothing to do with it, but my mind says, are there other parallel developments in other planets somewhere? When you think of it, there are so many planets and stars and God knows what.
Well,
The odds of there being nothing around.
So what you're saying is there another Brian or Karl-James Langford sitting on the planet?
we're all star
Maybe,
people anyway.
yeah.
There might be.
There's got to be, it goes against reason.
There might be. There might be. Brian, if you could check on the light, please. If there's no more questions, have you two enjoyed it today?
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
Good. Thank you very much.